This is what the carcass is going to look like when it's assembled, and what we're going to have to do is to put joints in here, here, here and here, and the same down the other side. And the dimensions for where we're going to put the joints I've got on a worksheet that I've used on the courses, but that I've altered. So here's the worksheet. The crossings out are because the timber I usually use is 12mm thick. So instead of 15.5 here, we've got 14. Instead of 68 for the drawer cavity, we've got 65. The shelf width is 14 rather than 12. This is the height of a Schwarz spice jar, and is not critical, but 127 is what I put. 14 for the next joint here, and finally 14 for the joint here. This distance is also 127. The critical measurements that we've got to really worry about are this, because we're going to be making drawers to just fit into that cavity, and if we get it wrong the drawers won't fit. This is really critical because when we do this housing joint we're going to have a loose fit if it's above 14, and the shelf isn't going to fit into the housing joint if it's less than 14. So 14 spot on, plus or minus nothing. This isn't critical. This is critical, this 14 here, and this 14 here is semi-critical. All those figures should add up to 375 that we cut the long pieces to. Before we start on the marking up of our joints on these bits, I thought I'd show you what I'd done with the material to make sure that visually it looks okay. We have got on this side a variety of colours on the edge of the timber, but if you turn it over you'll notice that they're all homogeneous. This is going to be where the drawer compartment goes in, and in order to remind me that this is going to be the bottom of the spice rack, I put an arrowhead or a triangle, whichever you care to call it, on there. So I know each time I put these together in this orientation. And similarly with the shells, what I've done is to sort them out, put an arrowhead on so that the dodgy bits are going to be on the bottom and the top, and the nice shelves are going to be in the middle without any malfunction in the surface. And here we have two beautifully marked up side pieces with the housing joints and the lap joints clearly marked. It's done to depth using a marking gauge. So all I have to do now is to saw out the housing here and here, the lap here and here, down to these lines, and we have a piece ready to start gluing up. But I haven't done it in front of you, and the reason I haven't done it in front of you, guess why? I had my iPad set to time lapse throughout the whole process. So I prepared two additional pieces that I'm going to mark up in front of you. I'm going to mark these up on one side so that you can see how that marking up is done. So let's go. We're going to look at the diagram that I was showing you earlier. Here are the dimensions, and we're going to start off by adding the dimensions up all the way along, and I've done the calculation here. So the first measurement is down here, which is 14. Then we add 65 to that. 14 and 65 makes 79, plus another 14 makes 93, plus 127 makes 220, etc. So rather than moving my steel rule up each time I draw a line, I'm keeping my steel rule in one position, and I'm just marking up those lines as I go. One mistake you might make is that you'll put your marking up for your joints on the face side. It's not the face side you mark up on, it's the opposite side to the face side. So all your marking up is going to be done on that. I'm going to start marking up at this end. So first point at 14mm, next point at 79, next point at 93, next point 220. Notice how much more accurate it is without moving the steel rule along each time. and the next one at 2, 3, 4. And then I'll have to move the steel rule up for the remaining one. So I've got to add 127 to that last dot. 127. And that remaining amount is closer to 15. So I guess the piece of material is slightly longer than I anticipated it was. Let's have a look. Yeah, it's 376 rather than 375. So that accounts for that. We're fine. We can go ahead. So now, with a really sharp pencil, I'm going to use my reference edge to draw lines through those dots, and then I can check them. Notice how fine the lines are. Almost invisible. In fact, they were invisible. So I'll go over that again. Line through the dots. I'm going a bit quicker than you might want to. You might want to put your marking knife on those dots to get the lines exactly in the right place. I'm going to chance my arm a bit, but not at the expense of accuracy. And I'll check them. 14, great. And this one is 79, as it should be, spot on. This one is 93, spot on, so that's good. Next one is 220, that's good too. And 234, lovely. And then this one wasn't critical, but it should be right. Yeah, it's a whisk, just a tiny whisker under 127, but that is not critical, so I won't worry about that. And here's a little bit of time lapse of a bit that I missed out, which is to do with putting the two side bits together and then measuring across with your square so that you can copy exactly the lines you put on your first piece. Now we can mark those up permanently. No going back at this stage. Knife dead on the line, because I know my lines are dead accurate. If they were slightly inaccurate, rather than redrawing them, I could put my knife slightly to one side. Risky strategy, but it's, if you know what you're doing, it works. By now you do know what you're doing. Remembering that I've got to make sure that knife goes over those corners so that I've got something to ping my knife into when it comes to doing the short sides. Turning it around so I'm still using that same reference edge, so all those lines are dead parallel to each other. Now I'm not going to go down the short sides with a knife, because when it comes to marking the sides up, I'm only going to take a knife cut halfway down the depth of the joint. So to get those cuts down the side dead in the right place, I put my knife into that cut that I've already done, get my super sharp pencil down the side there, and I go along like that, pinging it into the groove, bring the square up to it, swap for a pencil, ping it in the groove, line down the side, and line down the side, and the same the other side. Good, so that's all my lines done. So I've completed all my marking up on the opposite side to my face side, and I'm now going to put my two face sides on the same side and my two face edges together. The next stage of marking up both those pieces is to draw a line between these lines that we've got on the side here. And I'm going to set, because the wood is 14 millimeters thick, I'm going to make my joints half of that, so 7 millimeters is what I'm going to set my marking gauge to. Perfect. And I'm going to work off my reference edge, because if I've set this marking gauge slightly wrongly and I do half the lines off this edge and half the lines off the other edge, I'm going to double the error. So it's really important that you run your marking gauge off your reference edge only, all the way around the work. Now the way to do this is to look at where the point is at the start of your cut, and then turn the spur over so you're coming towards you. So you have to change your grip, one for a push and one for a pull. So let's have another go. Normal grip for your push, turn it over, and you're using your finger this time as your thumb was to drag that back. Now the textbook advice for this is that you put a little hole just where you want the spur to stop running, and being careful to control the spur, it drops into the hole just where you want it to be. Now personally, I find that a little bit hit and miss, but you might want to do it the correct way, and that's the correct way to do it. Then we're going over the edge. Very difficult to draw that line over the end grain. You have to do several passes reasonably lightly. And then I'm going to come back, just checking I'm working off my reference edge still. Here it is. Come back off that, and then work towards the middle. Make a reasonably heavy mark in that end grain, enough to be able to put your thumbnail into it, because when we come to cut that joint, we're going to put a chisel into that point, and it's useful to be able to feel that chisel into the groove. Just going to run a pencil in here, around the end here, all the way down this line. And here. Once we put a marking knife cut along here, we then have to go halfway down to our marking gauge line with our knife, so that when we saw our housing joints and our lap joints, these fibres don't break out. And because we've got that mark already in position, we can ping our knife in and just take down those lines with our knife as far as halfway. Now, to make sure we know what we're doing, I'll just show you the material that we're going to be cutting out. So we're going to be cutting out this piece, down as far as here, and that's going to be our lap joint. We're going to be cutting out this piece, down as far as there. And it's not a bad idea to, certainly before you get used to this, to mark up your wood so that you know the bit that you're going to be cutting, and it will remind you to saw on the wayside line. So when it comes to sawing, we're going to be sawing on this side of that line and this side of that line. And then those will be spot on 14. Our shells will fit in, and you'll hear the air rush out as they go in because they'll be such a brilliant fit. Great. That's the marking up done. All I need to do is to repeat it on this piece, but because I've already done it, I don't have to. And here are the bits that I did yesterday, and they're all ready as I've just shown you. So we're back to where we should be. Happy days. That is all ready to start cutting the joints, which we will do next session.